to welcome everybody to today's webinar. Today we're going to talk about securing personal information. My name is Ray Kuhl. I'm CEO of PBSI Technology Solutions. Today is the first of 4 cybersecurity education series webinars for clients and friends of Foster & Motley. I'd like to thank our friends at Foster & Motley who envisioned the need for this information and have been actively involved in the planning for these webinars. And you should know that the genesis of any of the security training that we've done for Foster & Motley has come from the perspective of Foster & Motley staff who started this whole engagement saying, we know we have clients who have important information and we're pretty sure that many of them don't know how to protect it, so we want to help clients. So thank you to our professional friends at Foster & Motley. Our goal is simply to educate how to protect electronic valuables, to improve knowledge about security, and to provide practical information about what to change if changes are needed. So today our focus is securing personal information. This will be a broad overview that will touch on some of the other topics we'll delve into in more detail in the upcoming 3 sessions. The following 3 sessions will dive into email security practices, which there's some really important and useful content in that webinar. Password management, possibly the most important information that we'll provide because passwords are such a difficult problem for most of us, if not all of us. And then we'll talk about file encryption, cloud security, and public Wi-Fi in a little more detail. So today, securing personal information is our topic. Many of you already know a lot about security. You may want to confirm or increase specific areas of knowledge. Some of you have an understanding of security basics, but you know there may be some holes. All of you know security is important or you wouldn't be attending. Hopefully there's something of value for everyone. We at PBSI and I personally as CEO are centered in the security world every day, learning every day, and it's from the active learning that we do that we modify, create, and publish content like this. One note, I will move quickly. I speak quickly anyway. I apologize in advance, but this is a heads up. If you're doing something else while listening, you may miss some content. Overview of today's topic, we're going to talk about what are the basics. Establish protection from the internet, secure your devices, and we've had many questions in advance about Macs and other Apple devices. We will talk about this. Macs should be considered just like PCs as far as the need for protection. iPads, iPhones in particular, not so much, interestingly, but we'll talk about that. We'll overview file encryption, what are some of the basics of file encryption and backup, and then we'll briefly touch on email security and principles, which we'll delve into in more detail in the next webinar. And how do we know if our protection is working? So those are our topics for today. For background, this webinar is all about providing information for Foster & Motley clients, not to provide a sales avenue for PBSI. We do provide technology services for hundreds of clients in the tri-state. Foster & Motley's been a long-term client and one of the most professional firms that we're associated with, top to bottom, by the way. Our staff at PBSI, I'm blessed as CEO to be able to say that of our staff, 75% have been with us 10 years or more, and experienced staff who are active learners help clients. So security is our business. So you've attended this webinar because you know that the internet is a dangerous place. Some recent information, the advent of increasing attacks on PCs and Macs, increasingly Macs, are being infected with malware that hides itself, steals passwords, and copies data without announcing itself. Key logging and phishing attacks change constantly, and the bad guys are relentless. But the key thing here is to know that in a lot of cases, increasingly, it's not the ransomware world where you get a message and you say your file's been encrypted and you need to pay a ransom. That happens, unfortunately, but many times victims are not notified. The recent SolarWinds attack being an example where it's now presumed well after the fact that attacks began in sometime mid to late 2019 and wasn't detected until late 2020. So bad guys sat on Department of Defense and Microsoft and all kinds of large companies' networks without being attacked. And so the danger of keystroke logging malware is important. So I'm not trying to frighten anybody, but this is the world in which we live. It's unfortunate, but it's true. The internet's dangerous. One of the things that is to me the most important thing, if there's a takeaway from this entire series that you might note, is password management. Don't use the same password. And many of you are groaning or saying, yeah, I don't think that's possible. But there are now 6.2 billion emails that are available for sale on the dark web for portions of a penny per email, and 1.2 billion of them include exposed cracked passwords. This is important. We'll talk more about why it's so important, but once a combination of email address and password is exposed out there, the hackers have free reign to try that combination on any site on the internet, any bank, any credit card company. So this is just part of today's reality. And recently, large companies, Cisco, Microsoft, LinkedIn, Yahoo, Gmail, I mean, the list goes on, and we see the list of new attacks daily, and frequently on any given day, there are recognizable names that appear. In other words, companies that you know where you didn't do anything wrong when you stored your password and email there, but they got hacked. And it's when somebody you trust gets hacked that exposes your information. The large event that made the New York Times and continues to spill out more details, this one hack got into tons of large organizations, including some of the highest level organizations in the land. Interestingly, part of the Department of Justice, one of the courts in the federal court system have made the decision to no longer publish their documents online as a result of this attack. Not that they're necessarily compromised, but they're simply stepping back and saying, we're not sure how to be certain that we're protected. So there's a website here, and everybody will receive a copy of this slide deck, or I should say that the copy of the slide deck will be available on Foster Motley's website within about a week. And so these links will work in those copies, but this link that I just went into identifies on the left-hand side the largest breaches. So 772 million email addresses are a part of this collection. So it came from multiple sources. 763 million, 620, 393 million, 234 million. Yes, each of these are separate sets of data. Now, many of them may include duplicates, but these are email addresses that are available that where records were breached. And just in the last day or two, here are accounts that were added. So 10 million more records and 19 million more records. So without belaboring this, the fact is the internet's a dangerous place. Okay, so that's why we need protection. We're going to talk about what do we actually do. So some of the basic fundamentals are, first, protect yourself from the open internet. And the most basic, and I think many of you already knows this, you already put passwords on your wireless, of course, but one recommendation here is use a long password, at least 12 characters. Why? Because free hacker tools, you can go to a website and look up free hacker tools. I actually haven't done that. I don't want anything to do with it, but I'm told it's readily available. And you can download software that can decrypt almost any password giving proximity and time. So that includes cars on the street, houses next door. So if you want to hack into your next door neighbor's email or internet, you can actually do it pretty inexpensively and easily. So I'm not suggesting that, but I am suggesting make your home Wi-Fi password or your work Wi-Fi password longer, because the longer the password, the higher the amount of time required to hack it. You're not going to be able to prevent your neighbor from hacking you this way because they have forever, but you will be able to make somebody who's sitting in a parking lot or on the street make it impossible. So the Internet of Things. This is a separate set of devices that are showing up in all of our homes and businesses now. These are televisions, Alexa, refrigerators, dishwashers. The list goes on and on of the devices that are in the broad category of the Internet of Things, non-data devices. So they're not PCs and servers. They're all kinds of other devices And these are increasing attack vectors. So 2 key recommendations. 1, change default passwords. Hopefully you do this, you get a new TV, you don't use the default password, you put your own in there. And then 2, this is something that pretty much some devices have automatic settings that you can set to update automatically. And I'd recommend you do that if it's available. But there are some devices like refrigerators or dishwashers or other devices like that where you really need to go manually to the manufacturer's website, and what you want to do is search on the manufacturer's website for the model of device you have, and then search for either updates or firmware, and you'll find a way to download to your device. You'll need to register your device, but that will work fine. So I want to make sure that my audio is working. I've had some feedback. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Had some feedback early on that sound wasn't working. Hopefully that's not the case. So close ports on home PCs. This is not something that most of you need to be concerned with. Open ports, it's a technical thing where you can set ports on a home router to be open to the internet, and you don't want to do that. Generally speaking, unless you've done something intentional, this will not be a problem for you. We recently had a client where a home user didn't know how it was done, but ports were set to open, so the bad guys on the internet, without a firewall in place, got into the PC and were attempting to attack passwords, and there were 30,000 failed login attempts on one particular PC. So this is not to frighten anybody, but if you want to have a scan run to make sure that your ports aren't open, we could help with that. But another thing that's should be a requirement for a business, for a home, not so much. Generally speaking, most homes are not protected by a firewall. You can buy a firewall for a couple $100 or less that will do the job. It's a hardware device that has software where you can set it to 1, run silent, and 2, have intrusion prevention software that's checking on the internet. So the value of a firewall is that the bad guys are out there pinging every IP address in the world multiple times per day. A firewall stops everything at your internet connection and prevents those pings from coming inside to the devices inside your home. Otherwise, each PC in your home or Mac or whatever will be receiving these pings, and generally the pings aren't going to cause problems, but a firewall blocks those. So in any of these areas, you can ask us for more follow-up if you wish, but the 2 basics for protecting from the internet: protect your wireless and make sure that your home or work devices that have internet connections are protected with a separate unique password. Okay, so protect ourselves from the outside. Where the quote action is in the security world for most of us is on our end PCs, Macs, and laptops. So the key elements here are: have an antivirus that is a paid antivirus. I'm saying don't use a free antivirus. Like with Windows, Microsoft, they call it an antivirus. It really isn't. Microsoft Defender, it provides some useful things, but use a paid antivirus. We use Bitdefender. You can use Symantec. I mean, there are many vendors of perfectly good antivirus, but I'd recommend paying. Why? What is different between the free versions and the non-free versions for the antivirus vendors? And almost all of them offer a free and a non-free version. And the answer inevitably is your data is for sale. And if you use a free product, somewhere in the disclaimer, you'll find, because this is free, we get our revenue from advertisers and so forth. So that's not universal, but that's pretty much what we see and what we've learned. Every device needs antivirus because the concept of multi-layer security says set more than one layer so that if one fails, the other is there to protect. And antivirus is your last line of defense. That if something gets through, that's running scans that will identify bad software and try and block, quarantine, and delete. Patch management. This is important. PCs now come automatically set to auto-update various software. That's your Windows or your Mac OS, your applications, your browsers, whether it's Chrome or whatever, you want to have these turned on. And that is generally the default setting. And the reason is once security patches are released, hackers begin probing for old versions. What happens is, let's say it's Microsoft who finds out about and fixes a vulnerability in Windows 10 version XYZ. So once they find out about the vulnerability, they fix it, and when they publish the patch to fix it, then they announce to the world, new patch is available that fixes this problem, because prior you could get under the surface by doing XYZ, and that's pretty much a requirement. They have to tell people what they fixed, but the bad guys are alerted. And so the clock is ticking. And the bad guys are going to learn how to get underneath that, or at least a lot of them will, and they'll begin probing every IP address in the world to find older versions of that particular software product. And it's unupdated security patches that are the second most common source of hacks. The first most common source are click mistakes in emails. We'll talk more about that. But unupdated security patches have been used for highly, highly publicized hacks where an organization had one PC in Brazil that didn't have the security patches up to date, and somebody accessed the network and got further. So anyway, on a home PC, you're not protecting the crown jewels, but what you are protecting is extremely important to use, certainly. So if prompted, do you want to update? The answer is always yes. You don't have to update that moment. Do you want to reboot? The answer is always yes. You might wait till tonight if you don't want to be interrupted during the day, but always yes. So that's really important. Keep your patches up to date. Most antivirus run vulnerability scans. It might be running hourly, it might be run nightly. But here's an element. Have you ever seen a scan result? If you're not paying attention to the alerts and acting on the alerts, you might want to engage somebody on the outside. PBS, I can do this, but there are other IT companies who can do this. So that's kind of a recurring theme, is have the software on your device that creates the alerts, but then how do you know what's important and who's paying attention? Now, the really key thing here is software downloads. Be very cautious about downloads. And if you want to download a piece of software, download from the vendor site. Be careful of search on the internet, download product names. So if you wanted to download Chrome and you searched download Chrome, you might be surprised if you look at the vendors where if you click on the first site, it might not be Google who's the author of Chrome. It might be some other vendor. And if you don't pay attention, you're downloading Chrome from a place that you don't know about. And in fact, that Chrome may be coming with something you really never intended. So downloads can be a significant source of danger. And some of the highest risks are some of the things that we think are the most benign. And think about it. If you were a bad guy, would you hide your malware in something nobody's going to look at, or would you hide it underneath beautiful pictures in a screensaver, or weather apps, or coupon sites, or free movies, or free music, free things on the internet? There are plenty of free things that are useful. Just be cautious. So software downloads. Keeping my device clean by minimizing the things I download and then uninstalling the things that I don't need are pretty important. So these are the basics of securing our devices. Then phones and tablets. And there are differences between Apple iPhone devices and Android devices, but commonly, one of the things that we all do, and this is going to go into the password management topic that we'll delve into detail in the third session. So when you are offered to store saved passwords on your browser, if you aren't storing a credit card there, then go ahead and save it. And if you're not using a common password, meaning the same password over and over, then go ahead and save it. But browsers are not protected. If somebody gets a hold of your PC, they already have a login to your browser, and they can find all the passwords you've saved there for all the different sites. So if you have credit card or other important information, the more important the site, the more important it is to not save passwords on your browser. And the recommendation here is use a password manager, but we're going to talk about that in more detail. On phones and tablets, hopefully everybody, you have a passcode. And you may not know, if you've had an iPhone for a long time, 4-digit passcodes were the norm. There's a setting in iPhone settings where you can make your passcode longer. and more complex. I don't personally use alphanumeric because it's just too much of a hassle, but you can make your passcode longer. Personally, I'd say enable face recognition because it's a way to avoid needing to remember passwords, and it's fast and convenient. So, summary here on protecting yourself, the fundamentals of your devices. Make sure your internet is secure, make sure your devices are secure, including your mobile phones and iPads. File encryption and backup. We'll talk about file encryption in an upcoming session, so I'm not going to spend much time here. I'm only going to identify that the files that the bad guys care about are the files that have important information. So think about tax returns, anything that lists social security numbers or other data that can be used to hack other accounts. Files that are at rest, that means you've stored them on your device. It might be the tax return from 2 years ago, and 3 years ago, and 4 years ago. Those are at rest. You can encrypt, and I'll describe exactly how to do this in the encryption session. You can encrypt any Word or Excel document or any PDF document for free simply by adding a password to it. So a document that's password protected is encrypted. So documenting or encrypting files that are at rest, we'll talk more about this, but it's easy to do. You just choose which files you want to encrypt to protect them. And why would you do that? What are you protecting? You're protecting against, remember, multi-layer security. If a hacker gets a hold of your device and you don't know about it, those files are open to them. So it's a protection against what happens if you're attacked. Encrypting files by email, you hopefully know this. Email is not secure, no matter what email, not Outlook, not Microsoft, not Gmail. It's not secure. Email is not encrypted by default. So you have the ability to encrypt an email, and generally that requires a purchase, although there are some free products like Virtru for Gmail is a free product. And so there are options to give you the ability to encrypt an email. You don't want to encrypt all your emails, but if you're going to send protected information, either encrypt the email or encrypt the attachments, or as a Foster Motley client, Foster Motley share files, a very convenient way. And I'm sure there may be some Foster Motley folks listening who receive emails from some of you where you're sending them documents with protected information, and they're groaning saying, oh, that's not secure, you shouldn't have emailed that to me. However, right on Foster Motley's site, you can upload files to share file, and it is secure, it's encrypted. So choose that method rather than email if you're going to send a secure document. Back up your documents. I can't tell you how many times with a 30-year career in IT, it hasn't happened frequently, but where absolutely everything was lost. But every time a backup failure, or excuse me, a data loss happens, a hard drive fails, inevitably the end user either thinks, darn it, I meant to back that up, or I thought it was backed up, or it's just painful, and it's unnecessary. So we'll talk about backup in more detail, but the principle here, keep multiple copies in multiple locations. That's the standard principle for backup. And there are products, PBSI uses one, offers one. There are others where automatically get a local copy, meaning it's stored to a removable drive at your location and also stored in the cloud. Recommendations for backup one is to automate it. If you say, well, I periodically back up my documents to a removable drive, fine, that is a backup. But what happens is we put that in place when we were really concerned about it, and 3 years later, nothing happened. And so we're thinking, I don't know, not that important. And all of a sudden, it's been weeks or months since you backed up, and now you've lost something important. So it's easy to automate. Just choose the right tool. It's not expensive to do. And choose a backup product that creates both a local, hopefully encrypted backup, and also an online copy. So back up your documents and encrypt those that need encryption. We'll talk about that in more detail later. I'm going to really cover this section quickly because this is a snapshot of information that we're going to talk about in detail in email safety webinar. But the basic principles are pay attention to unsolicited email, meaning you might know the person, but you don't expect this email. Always have your antenna up. Don't click on links in emails to get your news. Generally speaking, don't unsubscribe. If you know that it's Macy's having a one day and Macy's is, you've subscribed and you want to unsubscribe from Macy's, fine, go ahead and do it. But if it's a vendor you don't know, unsubscribe is used by the bad guys to verify your email and in some cases ratchet up their information for an attack. So instead, if you're using Outlook, right click on Junk Block Sender. And then learn how to evaluate what is a safe URL, and we'll talk about this in detail. So there's some basics of email evaluation, really important content in the third webinar. We've talked about no software downloads, we've talked about be careful with web links, and we'll talk in upcoming webinar in more detail about public Wi-Fi, password security, and a message here, if my PC is running slowly, don't just assume it's old. You can uninstall unused apps, you can ask for a security review. So these are important principles we'll cover in more detail. So we're trying to summarize today and some of the remaining topics. Protect your home devices, don't reuse identical passwords. Increasingly, we're getting more and more, and I'm sure you're seeing it as well as I am and all of us, voicemail and phone calls called vishing now instead of phishing is being more and more frequently used. I guarantee Microsoft will not call you to tell you that you need to reset your password, or you get a phone call. Virtually no one communicates by phone something that's important. Public Wi-Fi, we'll talk about this, but don't go to secure sites on public Wi-Fi. There are plenty of other good options, including use cellular. And when you're thinking about downloading something, make sure it's from the vendor. So I'm not going to do a demonstration, but I want to just identify that security monitoring is something that's inexpensive and available, and it's something we offer at PBSI, but you can have this done by other IT companies. But have somebody, this is a recommendation, who's paying attention to your PCs and getting alerts and making sure your patches are up to date. There's a ransomware protection product that's fantastic and inexpensive that we utilize that the vendor says you can't get ransomware on a device with this software running. You can have a data breach risk scan run. We offer this service for identifying how would you know on your PC what files out there have social security numbers or credit card numbers. You can have a scan run to identify those and make sure that your backup is monitored. When I hear somebody say, I think my backup's okay, I expect it, I hope it is, there's a way to make sure. So anyway, I won't demonstrate this, but know that these are things that might well make sense in them. Again, not fear-mongering, but in today's world, it's something worth considering. So the summary of the entire range of security: protect ourselves from the open internet, secure our devices, pay attention to email, which we'll dive into, pay attention to passwords, many important topics here, no passwords on public Wi-Fi, know if our devices are secure, and training. I'd encourage every family member to learn about secure behavior, whether it's watching a webinar like this or whatever. There are tools, and unknowledgeable people are the risk points where it's the risky behavior that's not intended to be risky, but it ends up being risky, is puts every device on your network at risk. So that's the end of content today. I know we moved quickly. The main general topics that we reviewed, we're going to delve into in more detail. The intent of today is to overview all of the topics, and upcoming, I encourage the email security practices and the password management webinar, because there are, we'll do some very specific training in the email security webinar that identifies how exactly do I make myself, and what's the secure behavior, and how do I know whether it's okay to click on something, and specific examples of what to look for. Under password management, this is just a really important topic that we'll dive into in detail. And then we'll also cover encryption, cloud security, and public Wi-Fi in more detail. So We are finished with content today. I think it's really important to start and end on time. I'm going to stay connected and answer some questions. For now, I'm going to stop recording, and then I'm going to take questions. Many of you have been entering questions as we've been going. So stay connected if you'd like for the questions, but I want to thank you for your attendance. Hope this has been valuable today.